Hey everyone, welcome to Value First, the product-led sales podcast, a weekly show where I interview product-led sales and growth leaders who share their secrets on how to grow revenue at SaaS companies. Today, I'm beyond excited to have Kashish Gupta as my guest. He's a multiple-time founder, previously venture partner at Bessemer Venture Partners, and now founder and CEO of Hightouch, the reverse ETL platform that helps companies sync customer data from their warehouse to sales and marketing tools. Hightouch just announced a fresh $40 million funding round at a $450 million valuation. Super excited to have Kashish on the show. Kashish, how are you?
Good, Fred. How are you?
I'm doing very good. So, the first question I want to ask is how freaking busy are you right now with the funding round and all happening in your space?
Yeah, it's a bad week to ask that question because given the announcement, this week has been pretty hectic. But it's been a lot of fun. We have a small office here in the Mission in SF, and so everyone in the Bay Area has been coming into our office, and it's been cool to have them around. In a remote world, it's just like nice to see their faces, and it felt like really good camaraderie. Like everyone's like just really pumped about the new round. Of course, they knew about it like a little bit ago, but it's been exciting. And then I think busyness is really a choice in the end of the day. So it'll probably slow down a bit towards the end of the year.
That's super cool. That's super cool. But I there's so much openness. Like just you I've reached out to you recently. We've had a chat. You engage. Like to see founders this far ahead, just engaging. I think that people coming to your office to celebrate the round shows that in the startup community. For people who don't know, just want to get from your perspective. Why did you start Hightouch, and what concretely is the platform about?
Yeah, so we started Hightouch last year, but we've actually had this company for almost 3 years. It used to be a travel company, and we did YC with the travel company in May of 2019. After which we raised seed round, grew that user base quite a bit up until the point where COVID happened and we had to shut down that business. So we've since then been looking for a new idea to work on in the customer data space. And the reason for that is because like both of my co-founders used to work at Segment. And so we were doing discovery in the customer data space and understanding like how do people centralize all of their customer communications and customer data and actually make it accessible to their go-to-market team. And the idea was that like let's say I'm a salesperson, I want to look up my customer. All I can see is like, oh, here's the emails you have with the customer. What if I want to see the support tickets, all of their like conversations with the solutions team, their interaction with the product, how many invites they've sent to other members of their team, like all that kind of stuff. It's actually missing for me as a salesperson. And so like that's like where we kind of started as like, okay, here's my problem statement, and explored further and further and further until it led us to data warehouse. So 2020, we basically spent most of our time talking to customers of all sizes, and we talked to like pretty interesting companies like Hulu, Walmart, like Turner, like learned from them about their stack, and they pretty much all said, look, like I already have centralization of data. I use this thing called a data warehouse, and it gets all the data in one place, merges it together, and gives me one central definition for what my user is and everything I know about the user. And then we were like, that's really interesting, because in our minds, Segment already did this, and Segment was that source of truth for the data. And so we kind of had to like break down the barriers in our mind that were like, oh, this problem is solved, and say, okay, maybe the world is changing and that people are solving it in a new way using the data warehouse. And that's really what led us to reverse ETL. So we built our customers a dashboard, and that dashboard was a place for them to take all of the data warehouse data and view it in like a nice UI, and be able to search by their user IDs or user email addresses and be able to see all the data. And when we did that, they were like, hey, like this is awesome. We really like this idea, but I can't take action on data. If you can get it for me into Salesforce or HubSpot, I can take action on it. But otherwise, it's just going to be in another dashboard, just like Looker. And so we're like, okay, that's a good point. And that's really how we thought of reverse ETL. And I think like the last like big pivot was like, they said, hey, like if you're going to build me this thing that goes from the warehouse over to Salesforce or HubSpot, can you give me a SQL UI? If you give me a SQL UI, then I can pretty much do anything I want in any transformation. And that's like the level of specificity or like customization I need in order to be successful. And so that's what reverse ETL became. It became a way to use SQL to get data from any data warehouse into any SaaS tool. And like really, the beauty of it is how easy it is to use, if anything.
Yeah. Why do you think people are using more and more data warehouses compared to CDP? I think that I
Yeah.
probably depends on the stage, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's because it's the only practical solution to the data problem. Because you have so many different SaaS tools now that all have their own data, the only place you can centralize all the data from those SaaS tools and your production database is the data warehouse. Like think of the data warehouse as a place where you literally just replicate the databases of all your SaaS tools into your data warehouse, and then you replicate your own databases from your production app into your data warehouse. And then you have all these different databases in your warehouse that you can merge and run queries on across the different databases. So like doing a cross database join is actually really difficult. But if you replicate everything to a data warehouse, then it's super easy because it's just like one table to another table.
Yeah.
And so originally, the reason the CDP broke apart and like didn't really work is because it could only store event data, and it couldn't really store all your relational data, things like your Salesforce data, Zendesk data, email data, and so on. Um, and it couldn't like pull all the data from your production database. So like the end of the day, the data warehouse has the event data plus all of your SaaS data plus all of your relational data, all in one place. And then the other point, like that's like not super important here, is that data warehouses are the only cost-effective way to do this. Like other databases just cost a lot more money because they're always running, whereas the new data warehouses only run when you run the query. So you're only paying for them at the point at which you run the SQL query.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I see too is a lot of companies when they from starting to Series B usually are using a CDP, a customer data platform,
Yep.
but then realize that they have a shit ton of data, they're using a bunch of tools and they need to centralize all that in a cost-effective way, which we see more companies like Series B and Plus having being on Snowflake, for example. That's super interesting. So you started the company 3 years ago and it was a travel startup company. You've decided to pivot because of COVID and then you switch to Hightouch. You've mentioned about the process, but the first thing you said is interview customers, and then like I'm curious to understand how you got your first 10 customers. Was that from your early like discovery or research conversations and
Yeah.
transition into customers?
So we're the first like conversations we had actually couldn't produce customers because they were very large enterprises. So it wouldn't have been practical to work with them as our first customer. Um, what
It would be
makes
tiring
me
to work with Walmart as
yeah,
the
like,
first
I mean that would be
customer.
awesome.
That's
Yeah.
exhausting.
I wish. So like that was like I will say like I feel very lucky. Working with Tejas and Josh, it's actually easier for us to iterate on product and ship product than it is to go out and like get contract signed and like get a long sales process. And so the type of people we are is that we'll have the conversations early on. We'll build product to show that we took the feedback well and actually turned that into a real product. And then like people will oftentimes bite and start using the product. And so for us, like we had a lot more people using the product than we had actual customers paying for it. And that's what we wanted. We were like, look, like I don't care if you pay me or not. Like give me feedback, use the thing, tell other people about it. And if you can do that for me, like that is actually success,
Yeah.
not signing like a few enterprise sales contracts. And I think that DNA kind of transferred over. So like the first 10 customers, I would say like really were like we had this MVP of a product. We were able to show it to them and say, "Hey, this is how it works." And we basically went through network to learn who actually wants to use this. And that's when we discovered data teams were going to be the ideal user. So we originally started targeting the market by going to ops teams and saying, "Hey, like marketing ops and sales ops, you probably should use this." And they honestly said, no, like I want the data team to use this. And they said, go talk to my data team. And that's how we got a lot of those conversations where,
Interesting.
yeah, where they said,
Interesting.
my data team already solves this today. They're just building it in house. Maybe you could work with them. And then we talked to them and they're like, hell yeah, we'd love to use it.
Okay, that's super insightful. And to come back on what you said, you guys are very product oriented. Like you're very thoughtful in how you build the product, but also your motion. And we're gonna get into that. Like from going from the first 10 customers that were like connections of you, word of mouth, and like really asking good questions and getting people on board. Like going from 10 to 100 customers to I don't know where you are now, but what does the funnel for people listening like? What does the funnel look like for a company like High Touch?
Yeah. So we, all of our leads are inbound. We do a lot of content marketing. We do some events. And for the most part, it's all product marketing. But like the reason we're able to get inbound leads, I think, is because we're really lucky that we have a category. Most startups like don't really get to have a category that early on in their life cycle. But
Yeah.
like for us, like we kind of started with this term called reverse ETL. The long story short of how that term came about is early on in our go to market, every time we'd show the product, they'd be like, "Oh, it's like reverse Fivetran." And Fivetran is the company that does any SaaS into the warehouse, and we do the opposite of that, right? So we do warehouse to SaaS, and so people were like, "Oh, it's like reverse Fivetran or reverse Stitch." And in our minds, we're like, "That's great that like with 2 words you can understand exactly what we do."
Yeah.
But we don't want to be called reverse Fivetran. It's not just like the same exact thing as Fivetran, but in reverse. Like it's actually its own new thing. And so we're like, okay, if people are going to call us reverse Fivetran, let's make up our own term. Let's call it reverse ETL, and let's popularize this in order to like give people a way to quickly and easily understand what this thing does. And the truth is this: that like we do a lot more than reverse ETL, but luckily that term actually gives people a good approximation of what we do, and then from that they can understand what else we do. So that kind of created our inbound funnel. Having
That's
this thing called
interesting
reverse
though,
ETL.
because in a new category, like you guys, yes, like coining the term is important, but usually, like what I see marketing teams like lose a bit of time on is like you
Mhm.
have to educate your potential customers on
Yeah.
your new space. You guys went from like producing content to early education to like actually go to market really quickly. Like,
Yeah.
how did you think about the actual content engine so it's not only education, but there's like call to actions
So
in the
yeah, I mean, so two things there. The reason it's different than just creating your own market is because very much so this market existed already, and this action in a company of reverse ETL already existed. So all we did was bring a name to it and give people a way to talk about it. So like pretty much every company in the world that is of reasonable size has to get data into Salesforce, right? And somehow they're using some script to go from some database into Salesforce. That's like a given. That means they're already doing reverse ETL, but they just didn't know what to call it, and they didn't have like a vendor category for that, and they were
yeah.
just building it in house. And usually some software engineer in the company was building it in house. And so the truth is that like if this demand and this like category already exists and you just give a name to it, then it's a bit different than like creating your own new category that you have to popularize, because
Yeah.
people can quickly and easily understand, oh yeah, I already do this and I would love to buy something. That's one. But the second is being a tool built for data teams actually really helped us. So because we started with data as like the core team that we serve with really, really deep features, um, people found out about us through the data communities, and the data communities are really tight knit. Like you go to Twitter, LinkedIn, Slack, like there's a few really tight knit groups of data people, and they all talk about like very similar ideas. And so when they heard about reverse ETL, it kind of spread very quickly. And so those were our initial users, and that's actually where we get a lot of our inbound from. Where like most users of tools like Fivetran and DBT are starting to hear about reverse ETL, and they may not buy it today, but within the next like 6 to 12 months, they'll probably end up buying something in reverse ETL.
Yeah. That's interesting. And it links back to something else that you said around product marketing being at the core of your early go to market strategy, Ben. And I think people out there listening struggle with the fact that for a lot of people they associate PLG with like a Calendly go to market motion of like I send you my Calendly, you experience the value as like not the user but the
Right.
receiver of the Calendly, you have awareness. For a tool that is more dev driven or that
Mhm.
ne- isn't necessarily like awareness, like there's not like outgoing awareness and
Mhm.
people using your tool and others experiencing it, like how did you think about, like I get that community was one thing, but how did you think about product marketing to create awareness of a tool that has more friction to onboard, it doesn't have like outbound virality?
Yeah, yeah. So you're exactly correct that like real product led growth is like Dropbox and Calendly and like these kinds of tools that have an invite feature where you invite someone and then they all see that you're using the tool. Tools like us in the B2B SaaS space are like a little bit more marketing led and like product marketing led, if anything.
Yeah.
So in the early days, what we did is we basically created content and told people about different use cases that they didn't really imagine doing with reverse ETL. So the big thing for us was
Interesting.
creating as much content as possible about the data warehouse. So we didn't say, hey, you should use reverse ETL or you should use Hightouch. We said, hey, the data warehouse should be used for more than it is currently being used. And that to people was very interesting. They're like, oh, interesting. Like, tell me more about that. And then we're like, okay, great. Like, what do you use your data warehouse for today? And they said BI. It powers Looker or Mode, whatever BI tool I have, and that's all it does in the end of the day. So it's pretty much data goes in and then just stays in there forever and never actually gets out. That's pretty much what the data warehouse was. And we're like, okay, like why aren't you using your data warehouse for operational applications to actually power like real automations? And they're like, oh, it's too slow. And then we said, okay, great. Like, is it still too slow, or is it actually getting fast enough now that you can actually practically use it for operational use cases? And they're like, oh, interesting. Like I didn't think about that. And so for us, it was not like this is what I actually want to talk about a lot more, which is that like we don't really like selling Hightouch. Like we like teaching people about like ways to use the data warehouse. And
Yeah.
if the way they want to use the data warehouse is eventually to use reverse ETL, that's awesome. They can use it. But it started from that education piece of like, what can the data warehouse be used for? And how do we think of the data warehouse as the long-term like operational tool in the company, not just analytical tool in the company? And so like one way of describing that is like, if you're using all your SaaS tools, what if you could just take your data warehouse and plug it into that SaaS tool, like a BYO database? So any SaaS tool I want to use, I just BYO database, and now that SaaS tool has all my data automatically. That's like the kind of vision that we were describing to people. That like you should own your data. It should be in your own database. If you change it and like run some transformation, it should automatically update in all your SaaS tools. And then you don't have to worry about privacy. You don't have to worry about security. You don't have to worry about web vendor lock-in. Like it's in your environment.
And at the end of the day, what you're describing to me is the definition of product-led sales. And that's why the show is called Value First. That's right. The ebook that I wrote is called Value First.
Mm.
It's whether you have a Calendly like awareness or a lead generation motion or your marketing led. For you, I think Hightouch is a good example of that in both your marketing and how you structure your product, how you structure your acquisition funnel of like, let us think about the user. Let us like show as much value as we can. Let's not talk about our tool. Let's talk about just data warehouses and the realities that people go through.
Yeah.
And then once they generate awareness and we help them move the needle forward, they'll get to the pain point that Hightouch solves, and then we're right there. So I think this is super smart and interesting, and you guys are the one of the companies that do it the best. I want to bridge that to your. So you said you have leads coming in on your website. You have a try for free, and you have a book demo. So I want to pick your brain on how you're thinking about sales, because you guys have people that engage, sales reps and CS that engage. You're really all out about showing the product. Like you have a try for free. You also have an interactive demo on your website. You have videos, but you still have a book a demo. And you told me you have CS and reps that engage. So I want to dive deeper on that. Pick your brain on how you're thinking about the sales and your product and motion.
Yeah, so different companies need different things, right? So there are some users that come in, they're qualified to set up by themselves. And for them, they should click the try now button and they should just set up the whole thing end to end. And there's certain users that want to learn first or understand how the thing works, how much it costs, that kind of stuff. And they should book a demo and then talk to us. So for us, like in every scenario, we would prefer you use the product before you talk to us. But that's not always practical because people have like different skill levels and different needs or different security concerns, right? And so we just want to be open to kind of like both of those interaction modes. But like if you look at our sales cycle and if you look at our sales training, it is very focused on how do we make our users successful with the product, up to the point where they should be saying, hey, dude, how do I pay you? Like, please, like send me some form so I can pay you. Like that's usually the interaction that we have, because like our salespeople aren't even focused on, and like, I'm not supposed to say this for our investors, but like our salespeople are not focused on things like how many dollars am I making from this customer. Like you look at any of the conversations the sales team has, it's always like, all right, how do we first prove value? Second, how do we get them onboarded and like a customer of Hightouch? Third, over the long run, how much do we think they'll pay over the next like 2-3 years? Because it's really not about day one revenue. It's really just about making sure that person uses our product for the long term and like has enough value that they don't churn, right? So day one of like the sales training at Hightouch is like, hey, we don't sell to customers, we evangelize the product. If someone doesn't need the product, that's not a customer that we're not going to sell to them, because they should go solve their data problem how they need to solve their data problem. And so like the mentality is very much like figure out what this customer actually needs and help them solve it that way. Some people don't have a data warehouse, and they should totally use Zapier in order to solve their data integration, right? Other people, they have some sort of data warehouse, but it's not ready yet, and they don't have data models in it. So they should first build those data models and get data into the warehouse. And we're very happy to help them do that. And we're very happy to help them connect to our data folks to help them actually understand how to do that and how much to pay and all that kind of stuff for the other tools. So tons of people, I guess like one very important thing to say is like, how do these interactions happen in a very organic way? It's because all of our users and all of our customers are in shared Slack channels with us, where they basically get a Slack channel in their own Slack that looks exactly like it's their own, like they're someone in their team, where they can just casually message us questions all the time and ask us things about the ecosystem. And so usually for like 3 to 6 months, we'll be helping people set up their data stack and do other stuff related to Hightouch before they actually end up becoming a Hightouch customer. And there's only one reason why we feel comfortable taking this approach. It's because we think ultimately they will eventually use the product.
Yeah.
Like, of course, it's from the goodness of hearts. Like, we want to do it just because it's the right thing to do, but also because like it's like we have this true belief, and like we learned this like probably like last November or December, that like everyone is predestined to use reverse ETL at some point in their company life cycle.
I
And so it's
agree.
our job to develop a relationship of trust and then just wait for them to become ready for reverse ETL.
We're doing the same thing, by the way. Like
That's awesome.
we're opening specific Slack channels for every one of our customers. We often help them set their setup. I think that's a really interesting one of thinking about sales in a more consultative way, and like what's the end
Mhm.
goal, what's the inevitable future that I believe in, and then what's the short-term end goal for my customer. I'll help them get through that, and the relationship will start. And I think that's something that I find super interesting about the space right now is people are looking to connect to companies, to relate to companies, and to build
Mhm.
those relationships. I think COVID accelerated that, though. Like that's something that I found is like people are trying to connect, and just you like taking the leap of faith to open a Slack channel, help them get through before they get to your product.
Mhm.
It must have a huge freaking impact on your churn. That's super interesting way to think about it. So that means you're merging sales and CS in some way. Like
Exactly.
you're morphing sales into like both sales and CS together, right?
Yeah. So a couple things. One is our friend Calvin from Segment, who was the CTO of Segment. He has a really good blog post called "Consulting Not Sales," and that is like our mantra for like find like ways to help people, and then eventually that turns into a sale, right? So I think like everyone here should probably read that post. I think that's like the best bible for how to actually do a consulting sales process, right? The second is like for us, yes, we combine like sales and customer success, but like the big one is exactly what you said, that people don't enjoy buying SaaS tools. Like, it's really boring to go through a SaaS buying process.
Yeah.
So how do you actually like bring life to it, right? Like, the number one thing we tell success folks and sales folks when they join Hightouch is, do not talk to customers formally. Talk to them as if they're your best friend and you've known them for 10 years. Like just like short words, acronyms, GIFs, whatever it is, like just like have fun. If you have fun, they're gonna have fun and they're gonna want to work with us. And working with us might not mean buying the product, but it means working with us, and that's what we care about, right? So you look at our shared Slack channels, it looks like a party sometimes. Like, it doesn't look always like a buying process, and it's not very serious a lot of times. But like, that's what our DNA is, and that's why like a lot of customers have given us feedback that they just love working with our go-to-market team. And it's really not just the founders. Like, in January, it was just us, and now there's so many more people, and they're all like just having a lot of fun with customers. And like we'll make fun of each other sometimes, like with customers too. Like, it's just like a good time. So I think bringing life into that process, just like you mentioned, is a secret sauce that cannot be replicated. You can build a good
Yeah.
product, you can make your pricing cheap, and that's like nice and objective and all, but people still want to work with the people they want to work with because they're good people and they're fun people.
And
Yeah.
you have to have the maturity as a leader to understand that like buyers or end users now have all the power.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're
As they should.
trying to do things the way they were done 10 years ago when the buyer had all the knowledge and all the power, now it's like, hey, you've read my marketing, you've tried my product, like you understand, you have the power, you've read Capterra, G2 reviews, you've went in
Mm-hmm.
communities. So how can I make it really about you and make it fun? That's man, I relate so much to that. I send a GIF to customers we work with in a Slack
That's
channel.
great.
That's the first thing. It's like a funny GIF. It's not like, "Hey, glad you're here," like
Yeah.
super formal. And I think it's super thoughtful for leaders like you to think about that and to change your culture.
It
One
sets
thing
the
that I would
tone.
push back on though, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, do you need to be venture funded to do that? because
Yeah.
it's like having marketing as your primary like
Yeah.
lead channel. You have to be patient. You have to invest a few months in it. You're probably going to get that sale not right away, but after.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on it?
I would agree that it is way easier to do so if you're venture funded, because then you can throw resources at the problem, right? Which is like, for example, we have like I think 400 shared Slack channels right now, like maybe 300, and that's not sustainable. People tell us all the time, like, "Dude, what the hell are you doing? Like, that won't scale," and we're just like, that's fine. Like, we'll find a way to make it scale because that's something that we really care about as part of our company, right? So you're totally right that like eventually it doesn't scale until you're without being venture funded and being able to hire. But in the early days, like if you have like yourself and a co-founder, or yourself and two co-founders, you just have to be willing to be in those conversations all the time and spend the majority of your time in those conversations. Like if you have like 20, 30, 40 customers, it's totally practical. I think up to like even like almost like 50, 60 channels, 100 channels, like we were doing it ourselves. And for that matter, like early stage companies do still hire engineers, bring your engineers into those channels. Like every single one of our engineers talks to customers probably on a daily basis, because that's again part of our DNA, where engineers work with customers and we deliver features very fast to customers. That's not like a customer talks to success, success talks to product, product talks to engineering, engineering manager talks to engineer, something gets
Yeah.
built 3 months later, and then manager delivers the product, delivers it to success, and then success says, here's the thing that we made a Jira task for like 6 months ago, right?
Yeah, and
There's
engineers
no
are in the
process.
shadows, in the background, like they don't talk to anyone, they don't view like they don't
Right.
interact with yeah.
That's like boring for them too. Like our engineers have fun because they get to talk to customers and they get to watch the customer use their feature or their integration or their product. Like it's like literally a feedback loop of like 36 hours of like customer asked for it, they tagged me, I built the thing, I delivered it, and now I watch them become successful, and then they thank me, and I feel good about my job.
Yeah,
Like,
they must create a sick culture for people working at Hightouch too,
yeah,
because
and it's fun.
you're like your engineers must feel like they're really driving impact. If you see, like I do the same thing, I invite my developers in customer shared channels, but it like it must drive such an amazing culture internally for you guys because you empower everyone basically.
I hope so, man. That's exactly like our goal, and I think that is exactly what's happening. And it not only helps engineers have like a good time and feel like they have the ability to make a difference, it also gives success and solutions agency in solving customer problems. So in
Yeah.
most companies, a success team or a solutions team is simply saying, "Here's how you use the product as it exists today to solve your problem." Not, "Oh, interesting, my product doesn't solve your problem. Let me go work with engineering to make it actually solve your problem for real." They usually have to just find a roundabout solution because their job is somehow fit the product we have today to make it somehow solve the customer need. So when like success and solutions have the agency to say like, "Oh yeah, like I can think of a feature that would solve this, and in fact I can loop an engineer in that would actually make this happen in less than a week," it gives them agency to serve customers well. It makes them feel like they're doing customers justice too. So like, and again, like I don't really know how other companies work that well, but both of our customer success, all three of our customer success team now are from Trade.io. And so they tell me like kind of like the difference between Trey's customer success team and ours. And the primary difference they mention is that like here, if we want to build features that help customers do something new, we can do those pretty quickly, like days. Um, and that just changes how they offer their time to customers and what they offer to customers.
That's amazing. That's amazing, man. When you think about like do things that don't scale, like the famous quote, people think, "Oh, you only do this until seed," but like you're Series B and you still have that mentality in a lot of your processes. I think that
Yeah.
really shows like putting the customer first. That's super cool.
Well, I mean, one thing to call out is in this fundraising environment, like what is really a Series B company? Um,
True.
we're only 30 people. Like we still very much so operate at the same speed and like 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 the same type of culture as we did when we were much smaller, which was just earlier this year. Um, and like yeah, going from 4 people on December 31st to like 30 people now, like we really only like changed like how many people are involved with any given thing. So like a given customer might interact with 3 go-to-market people now instead of 1, but it's a very similar interaction, and that's like the like one of the biggest things like I like to spend my time on, which is when people join Hightouch, it's like, hey, like this is how we talk to customers. Like if you use words that are like greater than 7 letters, I don't think you're doing it right. Like we talk to them as friends, and that like that's the kind of stuff where if you can onboard them in a good way, like on the first few days, then they're going to carry that culture for the rest of their time at the company.
Yep.
And that makes it really easy. So, I mean, like last thing I'll like on the previous point that you mentioned on like sales and customer success being one, that is like very much true. So like one thing I'll say, like for any product driven company, um, your customer success motion has to be pre-sale, because your sales cycle includes them using your product and becoming successful with your product, right? So usually it's like sales will go do something, sell the product, sign the contract, throw it over to success and solutions, and now success and solutions have to implement the product with the customer and make them successful on the product. In the product world, it's like customer finds success, talks to sales, then buys. And so the fact that they have to be successful with the product, using the product, very happy with the product before they make a sale, means that it's all one. You can train your salespeople to be success people. You can have a success team. You can have a solutions team, but all three are naturally going to be pre-sale. And then you might have another few staff that are helping existing customers that have already purchased become even bigger customers or like use different parts of the product. And that's also great. But for the most part, like you have to move success pre-sales. And that's, I think, where a PLG CRM like really shines, because currently there's no CRM for success people. Like you can say Gainsight or like Catalyst or like Tatango are like CRMs for success people, but they're like okay CRMs for success people. I think they do a really good job of like process management and human process management, but they don't do a great job of like product data.
Yeah, that's
And
a
that's
big
why
one.
like the PLG CRMs actually do make sense, because that's where the success team can go in and say, okay, here's all the product data. Here's where customers are stuck in onboarding. Let me go unblock 6 customers today from setting up some resource in my product. And then you check those off, like, okay, these 6 customers are now unblocked in the product, and now they're moving on to the next 3 steps. Like
Yeah.
that's different. That doesn't exist in the Salesforce world.
Yeah, that's literally touching on like the reason why we exist, right? Is it's not anymore you run marketing, sales outreach, they do a sales process, they pass it to customer success. You said it,
Mm-hmm.
like it's morphed. You might have CS pre-sales, sales pre-sales, and then CS post-sale. And if you have to jump through 48 tools to try to figure that out for the people actually running that process. So I think that's why it makes sense. That's something that I see also our early customers do is they track like the main milestones that people go through in the product. And like the first stage might be CS that actions on that and like receives the Slack notification. The second one might be sales. The third one might be marketing. Like it's all morphing into, I think, switching the mentality from a process from our perspective as the company selling to
Mm-hmm.
a process that thinks about the buyer journey or the
Dude,
user
that's
journey
a
first.
great way to put it. I love that. Like, what
Cool,
are they
man.
thinking when they're going through the product journey, talking to my salesperson? Like, if you're in their shoes, they probably don't want to talk to the salesperson. They're probably just like, why is this person reaching out to me?
Yeah. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like if I sign up to your product, that's because I have an intention of going somewhere. And whether that's a CS person that interacts with me, whether that's your product itself or sales, like at the end of the day, companies need to start thinking about, okay, what's my user flow? And then how can I have my teams interact at the right moment if people are stuck, if people can go faster, etc. So I think you've just like gave the blueprint for why solutions like us exist and why
Mm-hmm.
there's hype about the space. That's super interesting, man. I need to let you go because you're a busy man, and we've had a long chat. But that was extremely interesting. Like I could have continued this for 2 hours and learned so much.
Yeah,
But
man.
before I let you go, one last question: is there something that I haven't asked that you think I should ask you?
Yeah, I mean, like, I would say, like, I mean, yeah, I feel like if you wanted to ask about like the culture at Hightouch, there's like a lot of things to talk about that like we would be very happy to share.
Well, let's
And
take a minute or two on that because I think that's one of the hardest things for SaaS companies, and a lot of founders who are listening to this show struggle with this.
Mhm.
So, how did you guys actually implement a good culture? Like any quick tips like that you
Yeah,
can give
dude,
people?
I'm telling you, like, we got insanely lucky because we brought people in that brought the right culture in. Like, usually
That's
it's
the
like, okay,
perfect answer from a leader, by the way.
no, we got, dude. It's like I'm telling you, like usually, like people say, like, oh, you know, we had an offsite, we thought of our 4 values, we wrote them down on a whiteboard, we told the whole company about the 4 values, and then we implemented them procedurally. Like to be very honest, like we brought people in, and they became like the nodes of excellence for the culture, and they started like saying, like, this is how we're going to run things. Like we need to be really good to customers, all that kind of stuff. The only like real influence we had was saying things like, look, don't focus on dollars, make customers really happy, work with them day to day as friends. Like that's like the kind of stuff that we took from our past companies. Like for example, with the travel company, like we again had a very Slack focused tool. We were talking to customers about their travel plans on Slack, and we literally like talked to them as if we're their best friend. Um, and that's why they liked working with us, because they felt like they were talking to like a true peer. And that's the kind of DNA that we brought over. But for the most part, like we're lucky that the right people came in, and then we were lucky that we could though focus on the long term. And that's what comes back to your point about being venture funded. It allows you to say, hey, I don't need to make revenue tomorrow or the day after.
Yeah.
I can make revenue next year. And for now, I can focus on like what will make customers really, really happy. And so like in the beginning, founders are testing their pricing model on many different companies and figuring out what the right pricing model is, right? We've had like 4 pricing models. Only like 2 of them have been public. But like we changed it in the early days because we didn't know what the pricing should be. And now it's like as customer friendly as possible. But in the beginning, it was not as customer friendly. And we learned from that, right? The only thing I'll say that really on culture is like if you're lucky enough to have the time to focus on those things, they just pay dividends for like
Yeah.
tens of years. And like I think like the now that we have like a little bit of breathing room because the team has grown, we're able to say things like, hey, like focus on yourself. If you want to take time off, like the whole team is here to support you in doing that. Like those kinds of things. Like we're all just people, right? Like exactly what you were saying about your customers going through their journey. They're just people. They have like a day job where they have to buy your product sometimes, and then they have a lot of other stuff going on in their lives. That's probably more important to them than work. A lot of times the same is true for your team, where like there's other things going on in their lives, and if you're not part of that and you're just part of their workday, then like honestly you're not part of their lives. Like that's not enough for us. And
That's a
hope
that's a great insight. What I'm getting from all that you're saying is like think of everything you're doing with the mindset of great people in your company and thinking about people first when you're serving your customers and you're trying to get customers, and it'll pay dividends on both sides. I think it's really relatable. It'll pay dividends on your culture, it'll pay dividends on your productivity, but it also pay
yep,
dividends on your churn and on your customer referrals on the
yep,
other side, which is
exactly.
like if people want to get one thing from this conversation that's super useful. And I think the highest growing companies are really thinking that way. So you're a good example of that.
The only thing to add is like hire people based on that culture, like that they will bring, not based on just their skills. There's a lot of skilled people out there. I would rather take the person that has less experience and may not even know exactly how to do their job, but they care like 10x more. Like caring is a great approximation for them figuring shit out and being able to like be
Yep.
excellent.
Yep.
But you can't teach the skilled person to care. You can totally teach the caring person to become skilled. And so like a lot of like we love betting on people rather than like finding the 10 years of experience person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's man. We could do another podcast episode just on that because I think there's a lot of different positions on that. But I on that statement. But I agree with you 100%. I think high touch just like embodies a lot of the values of why product led growth is inevitable, go to market motion, and companies that are highest growing, like think about people first, whether it's customers or
Yeah.
their employees. Man, I absolutely gotta let you go now, but it was an
Cool.
amazing discussion. I really enjoyed it. If people
You too,
want
Fred.
to learn more about Hightouch, they're going to go to hightouch.io. And what's the best way to reach you, Kashish?
Yeah. My email is good. Kashish@hightouch.io.
All right. Thanks, man. Have a good one.
Cool.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming
Thanks,
on
Fred.
the
Thanks
show.
for having me.
See ya.
Bye.